What is the importance of a boot camp? Like, what is the relevance of a boot camp?
As I said, I think it's one of those times when you don't have the active pressure of being like, oh, we have a new patch to work on. Oh, we need to prep for this game. We have to play this champion for this weekend, stuff like that. So it's a lot more freeform than a lot of the other practice. It's a lot less directed. Whereas during the split, our practice is, okay, we played 2 games last week, and in those 2 games, we messed up on this one aspect, and we must improve our dragon control for this weekend. And so it becomes very obvious, like, what you need to solve based on the previous week. Whereas the bootcamp is a lot more freeform, a lot more, okay, how do we want to play the game on a big picture level? It's much easier to have a lot of these like wider discussions about our game philosophy and who we want to be as a team. And it's a lot easier to take the game at kind of a more theoretical, more abstract level and practice in a more broad manner of kind of seeing what works for us and what kind of team we want to be. So yeah, you can definitely get into a lot more of the theoretical, abstract, philosophical details during a bootcamp, which I think is really helpful. It depends, like obviously if it's like the first time the team has ever played together, then a lot of it is about figuring out who we are and what style works for us, and then making sure that people are having fun actually playing together, and that like obviously at the beginning everyone is trying really hard and everyone is super motivated and everyone tends to be really happy. You know, you have a honeymoon phase, and it's really important that during that phase you identify, okay, this might be a problem in the future. Let's just have a quiet word on the side about that one and make sure that, you know, we're prepared for if it does grow into a bigger problem, and that we sort things very early on.
Yeah.
Just getting to know people.
Yeah, true, that makes sense.
How is your work different before the split compared to during the split?
This touches upon what we spoke about initially. This is about trusting the systems. This is about having set up the logistics chains, making sure that we have automated processes for acquiring new gear and getting all this stuff done. Our jerseys are all in place and whatever. The second the split hits, weird as it sounds, that's actually when I am the least busy.
Yeah.
I'm most busy leading up to, but the second you guys really get into the thick of it, if my systems work, if everything is done, if everything has been shipped and brought ahead of time, this is when I can kind of lean back and go, okay, now I manage, I don't create.
Yeah, it's maintenance rather than actually figuring out how we do things and how we solve problems.
Yeah, the plumbing should hopefully all be working at this point, and I'm just looking for leaks every now and then, and that's it. So for me, the active season is the least stressful part and the one I'm looking the most forward to.
There you go. When we start prepping for a match, I mean, the schedule actually for us changes depending on whether or not it's a new patch week, because obviously it's a fortnightly cycle. So
I don't actually, do people know about that?
I mean, maybe.
Like the impact of that, because that was one of the things that surprised me coming in. It's how big of a difference in the schedule it actually has when we've had patch day, because all our normal systems of like having the content shoots on Mondays and stuff like that, all that gets kind of pushed because we need to get on top of the patch. So it's actually quite impactful.
Yeah, so new patch week, the Monday is like a big rush. Like, okay, we test everything. We make sure that we figure out, like, you know, we leave all the champions open, we don't ban anything, and it's like, okay, we just lock in the champions that have been changed, and like, we just figure it out, you know? Even if we haven't necessarily played them that much, like, we just figure out how things are working. And then so a lot of that week goes into actually just figuring out what has changed and what's important. And sometimes there might be, you know, patches that are not that big. But a lot of the time, I think increasingly recently there have been like a lot of champions are like, well, we haven't seen that champion in 6 months, that get changed. Even if the meta actually on the surface has not differed that much, I think even in the last year and a half, for example, for the jungle, it's not changed that much. But there have been a lot of times where I think Riot has tried to change the meta, you know, so it's like, oh god, we have to play this champion now, and then you figure it out. Same thing happens with new champions like Zeri, you know. Not to mention that, you know, you always have to look back at the previous week, and maybe your previous meta read, even if nothing had changed in the patch, maybe your meta read was like actually wrong, and you're thinking that Twisted Fate is like the most broken champion, and then you're week 3 of playoffs and you're like, TF lost every game. Now we have to change our meta read. So a lot of that does come down to adaptation, and that has an impact on the schedule. So on a new patch week, we spend a lot more time practicing and a lot less time doing content, performance, team building activities, things like that.
Yeah, exactly. So new patch weeks are always a little less hectic for me, and I kind of use them to prepare for the week after, where we then compensate for lost time, if you will.
Yeah, exactly.
So it does kind of fluctuate and affect everything.
Yeah. The second week of the patch, we tried to introduce more kind of new concepts to the team and actually actively work on like broadening our game understanding rather than adapting in the moment. And then obviously come Thursday, it's time to start, you know, having draft meetings, talking to the staff, bringing ideas to the players, saying, okay, what do you think about this champion into this champion? And then we start to like actually narrow down our ideas and get more specific with, you know, Monday is, this is our big picture idea of what the meta looks like, and Thursday is, can you play this champion into this champion? Can you play this matchup and are you happy with it? And is it a 55-45? Does he have early prio? Like, can he dive top at level 3? Like all this stuff.
Yeah, no. So, like, how do I ask this question?
What do we do for warm-up? Or are you looking at question 1?
Complain. Like, they complain a lot. And we make them do it, but they complain a lot.
I mean, warm-up is, we try to do visualization, we try to do meditation, we try to do physical warm-up, and we also try to make sure the players actually have, I mean, a part of it is also prepping for the draft and giving people final reminders, doing scouting. We do scouting on the day of, okay, this is how this team plays, and here are some reminders from us, you know, when you go into the game, here are 3 things to remember about playing against Rogue.
That kind of, the studio, like what do we bring to the studio as a preparation for the games? That's mostly logistics. People, obviously, it helps bringing those.
And we do actually have to think about who we bring to the studio.
We do.
Sometimes there are limits because of COVID and things like this.
Yeah, this is true, and there have been issues where we wanted like extra assistant coaches, but you also kind of want the performance people there, and you kind of need the manager there, and so there's a bit of a Tetris that needs to work out sometimes. But outside of that, it's mostly gear, and it's like the transportation side of that is, if we've received new upgrades, we need to make sure that we bring spare for these upgrades in case anything happens. And we need to make sure we have extra cables, because there is a weird phenomenon where players forget cables. And
there's always something that gets forgotten. Yeah. There's always like something that someone's like, oh crap, I don't have like my USB wireless dongle, or I don't have my like charging cable, and my mouse is on 20% battery, by the way. Like, okay.
I forgot my mouse. I was like, you'd think that you'd remember something as important as that, but yeah, no, that happens a lot. So yeah, we do that to the studio. We bring that mostly. Otherwise, logistics in terms of traveling to the studio, cars are good.
Yeah,
they make it a lot easier. And it's mostly been taking cabs lately because we didn't have the logistics. Again, COVID made it very difficult. But yeah, it's mobile transportation really.
How do logistics work in terms of traveling to actually go to the studio? Cars, yeah. Okay, you answered that.
That's the one, yeah.
That's true. Okay, so you were answering that in the previous question.
I was being clever.
Right, you answered 2 questions at once.
This is the planning ahead part.
And I missed that.
Building systems.
And I asked the second question again.
Silly.
Good. Okay, now it's both of our turns.
It is.
How does the pre-match kind of preparation in the studio look like?
I think that really depends on whether we're talking best of 1s or best of 5s.
Yeah.
Because in a best of 1, we have a few snacks. There's maybe some water, there's some stuff, but we're there for like an hour. So we show up, do a bit of mental prep, get kind of ready, get in the zone, and then we leave. Best of 5 is very different because the players are there for a very long time. They are under a different kind of pressure. If it goes to game 5, we need to have prepared food, which is obviously a thing that we're quite heavy into, but we need to prepare food, snacks, drinks, and all this stuff so that in between games...
You just named food like 3 times.
Yes, but there's real food, and then there's like the little quick stuff that they all stuff their faces with.
So there's a meal that we make sure that everyone has like a full stomach when we arrive, and then that we make sure that everyone has like every possible piece of snack they could want under the sun. Do you want protein? Do you want carbohydrate? Do you want sugar? Do you want caffeine? Do you want like fats? Do you want like, what is it that you want?
Yeah,
what is it that you feel? Also, what do players like eating? Or what are they likely to just pick up and like naturally eat while we're talking about stuff? You know, finger food.
You've got to hack the players somehow. You've got to put things in front of them that we know is good for them and will help performance, but that they also want to put in their mouth. You know? Yeah. So you can't just put like a bunch of really healthy stuff that you haven't made a bit like appealing to look at, because they won't touch it. If there's nuts, we'll just all have nuts.
We put a surprising amount of effort into the presentation of
there's a lot of that, but it also means that when they then get there and for a best of 5 and stuff like that, you have all these players who are constantly snacking. They're constantly picking something up and eating, and that helps keep the energy levels high, which is really important. So we have to prep for that for a best of 5. Whereas, like I said, a best of 1 is easy mode. Like we bring a snack, some drinks, off you go. So I think there's a huge difference in those two. And that actually leads us to the last one, really. You know, what happens after the match?
So obviously, there's like, you have to try and balance between like, sometimes there'll be like a really rough loss, and then you have like your team talk and whatever, and you have to balance that between that and press. For example, press is the major thing. Usually it's a case of, okay, well, X has an interview, and generally speaking, when players have interviews, we just do them. We don't tend to like to turn down interviews. Unless there's like a kind of special compensation for it, so-and-so is feeling sick, he's had a really rough day, whatever it happens to be. There are extra considerations there, of course. But yeah, generally speaking, we try to have a post-match talk as a team and say, you did this well, take this into tomorrow. There are extra considerations, obviously, if we have a match tomorrow, because then we have to think, okay, how long do we spend at the studio? How long do we spend debriefing? How long do we spend doing interviews? Often there's Riot content afterwards as well, where, Riot wants to take such and such for features to use later, and that can take quite a long time. So then there's obviously logistics element of, you have to decide whether or not you're splitting the players. Do we take them all home at once? Do you get a taxi for them later, etc., etc.? I always have to go back to the office because I keep all my suits at the office, so I get changed there, and then I go home from there. But that's not like a big issue for me.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is normally if we have Riot content that we have to do on top of interviews. Riot content does take a lot longer. There's a lot more setup, and a lot of the players live in the same place, so they would want to go together, and then it's kind of figuring out, okay, do we split you? Do we set you up? Who do I hold back? Sometimes that might even affect, if they want two different people who are going two different directions, I might make them take someone else so that we can get everybody heading the same way to have the same delays in terms of content. But it's basic stuff at the end of the day. It's just kind of making that Tetris thing all add up again.
And then there's food, because obviously the finish time is variable, right? Like we might finish at 6 p.m. or we might finish at 11 p.m.
Yeah, true. If we finish early, we eat. Like we eat together. We do a thing. We make sure that we kind of wrap up. Whereas if we finish really, really late, we have that huddle, but then we also allow people to go home because everyone's tired.
Yeah, go fast. Go home ASAP in that situation, especially if we have like a match tomorrow. For example.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Then the focus.